Welcome to the Therapy and Prayer Podcast. Here you'll find the intersection between faith and mental health. I'm your host, Camille. I'm a licensed therapist and clinical social worker, but more importantly, I'm a Christian who really loves the Lord. And I'm just trying to navigate this life without falling victim to it, just like everyone else. Here we take a faith-based approach to all things mental health and wellness, because the Bible tells us to guard our heart and mind, and sometimes we need a little bit of help with that. Hi everyone, welcome back to Therapy and Prayer. I'm so happy you're here per usual. Let me tell you something. The devil did not want this episode to come out because it was a struggle for me to try to organize my thoughts around this, which makes me believe that this is exactly what we're supposed to be talking about today. So I don't want to speak too soon, but I feel like this episode is going to be pretty good. All right, we're talking about self-sabotage today. And we're talking about how it kind of keeps you feeling stuck and the spiritual strongholds that come with it. That's the part that the enemy didn't want us to talk about, okay? Because we talk about these spiritual strongholds, and the more we talk about them, then the more we're going to be able to be liberated and freed from them. All right, so I know that I am not the only person who has struggled with self-sabotage in the past. Essentially, it's this whole conflict that we have between the things that we say we want for ourselves and then the actions that we actually take. A lot of the times, the actions that we take seem to be in conflict with what it is that we say we want for ourselves. And we're not exactly sure why it's so hard for us to just do the thing. I want the thing so badly, but whatever it is, something in me keeps stopping me from taking the actions necessary for that thing to happen. So then we start to question ourselves, like, do I really even want that thing at all? And it's just this whole mess. So I want to start with an excerpt from a book on self-sabotage called The Mountain Is You. Self-sabotage is when you have two conflicting desires. One is conscious, one is unconscious. You know how you want to move your life forward, and yet you are still, for some reason, stuck. When you have big, ongoing, insurmountable issues in your life, especially when the solutions seem so simple, so easy, and yet so impossible to stick with, what you have are not big problems, but big attachments. I want us to focus on those big attachments today. It's easy enough to know what the problem is or to recognize the problem, but I think we mislabel it a lot of the times. And self-sabotage is about way more than just being lazy or undisciplined. That's kind of the easy way out. That's what we attribute it to more often than not. Oh, I'm just so lazy. I just don't have any self-discipline. But it goes way deeper than that, as do most things. If you haven't noticed by now, everything is deeper than it seems. Everything is deeper than it seems, especially when it comes to patterns in your life, things that kind of keep coming back around and keep showing up for you. It's always deeper than it seems. Self-sabotage lives in this gap between who you are and who you want to be. We all have this vision, right, for our lives. We talk a lot about our 5-year plan, our 10-year plan, or we think way ahead. We're planning our weddings. We're planning our lives for our children. We have these future careers planned out. We think way ahead. And sometimes those thoughts about our future self can be very vivid. And it's like you know that person intimately already before they even exist. When we spend so much time thinking about that person, then it creates this dissonance between who we are and who they are. Now, sure, there's work to be done to get to that version of ourself. But I think sometimes when we focus so much on the future version of ourself, then it makes us insecure about who we are now, and it makes us doubt our abilities to get there. So then thinking about your future self, instead of being aspirational, it becomes all about thinking of the ways that we want to be different, the ways that we're not good enough now, not capable of being this future self that we've imagined. So we think so much about how we want to be better than we are now. Now you might think, girl, what's wrong with that? We ought to be setting goals for ourselves and having aspirations. Hey, it's okay. Nothing's wrong with that. The thing is that when you are only focusing on what you lack, then you're going to identify more with what you lack than what it is that you're aiming for. We develop this laundry list of things in our head that disqualify us from reaching our full potential, right? And so it it creates this interesting dichotomy. And it's like a part of us really wants something new, but then a part of us, another part of us is either afraid of the new thing or is convinced that we will not be able to maintain the new thing that we want, or that we are not capable or qualified or worthy of this new thing that we want. Is this making sense? I hope this is making sense, y'all. Sometimes when I think things through in my head and then I try to say it out loud, I feel like I'm losing people, or maybe I just feel like I'm confusing myself sometimes, but I hope you're following me. When we think about our future selves in comparison to who we are now, remember what we said about comparison? We tend to compare ourselves through a lens of deficit. We tend to compare ourselves from a perspective of the things that we lack, even when we're comparing ourselves now to our future selves. Isn't that kind of crazy? Isn't that kind of crazy that we can still fall victim to the downside of comparison, even when we're comparing to ourselves, a version of ourselves that doesn't even exist yet? That's kind of meta. Like, this is wow, I never thought about it that way, but that happens a whole lot. So we become hyper focused on the parts of ourselves that we want to change. And I think that when we're analyzing our situation and we're doing a lot of that reflection and self-evaluation, which I think can be really healthy, we have to have a certain level of balance. We cannot only focus on the things that we want to change. We have to also focus on the things that we like about ourselves, the things that make us who we are, the things that help us grow and that are really important and significant. When we only focus on the parts of ourselves that we want to change, and we only identify with the parts of ourselves that we do not like, we're essentially focusing on the parts of ourselves that we are wanting to reject. So it becomes this kind of self-rejection. So even though we really want to grow and evolve, we have this attachment to the parts of ourselves that we are rejecting. The attachment comes from how much time and energy we spend thinking about and interacting with those parts of ourselves that we're wanting to change. Have y'all heard of radical self-acceptance or radical acceptance? It's this concept, and I'm not like super fluent in it, but really it's just this thought that you accept every single part of you as it is now, as it stands now. I think that there is a way to accept parts of yourself while also working to change them. Accepting that they exist now as a part of your story now is not the same thing as being complacent with who we are now and never wanting to grow or change or evolve. Acceptance is an acknowledgement of where you are without judgment. That's the piece. It's the judgment piece that really leads into that rejection of self. And that's an important part of the self-sabotage for a lot of us. Now, when we talk about self-sabotage, there are a lot of different ways that it comes up for different people. But because I'm really all about healing that relationship with yourself and self-compassion, I'm going to come at it from that angle and really look at how that affects our ability to move forward in life and this stuck feeling that we have so much. I've just really learned that once we can really acknowledge and lean into the fact that we hold ourselves captive, it's really empowering to then also acknowledge that you are able to liberate yourself. If you're the one who is holding yourself captive, you're the one who can free yourself from that. And to me, that's just a really powerful thing, because sometimes it just feels like life is happening to you and everything is happening around you, and we just feel like we're a victim of our circumstances. And we know that we can't control everything. But this is one of those really big, important, significant things that you can control. And if we can learn how, then it can really change the trajectory of your life. So for me, I feel like it's important that we really kind of dig a little bit in this area, like how we're kind of holding ourselves back. That's the self in self-sabotage. The part of you that is rejecting the areas that we want to change and grow, like that's the part of you that is also fearful of the new things. That's the part of you that is also afraid of stepping out of your comfort zone and trying something new. That part of you is most likely the inner critic that we talk about a lot when we talk about self-compassion. Now, let's spend some time with your inner critic for a moment. Usually our instinct when it comes to our inner critic is to just like, we want to shut it down. we don't want to be a victim to that critical voice anymore. And we want to stand up for ourselves, right? To that inner critic, which we should. At the same token, we have to acknowledge that our inner critic is usually the part of us that holds on to some of the most painful memories and experiences. So that part of us is coming from a place of defensiveness and wanting to protect us from experiencing further hurt of a same sort that we've already of a road that maybe we've already been down before. And so the key that we have to really come to grips with is that we have to somehow, some way, find a way to forgive ourselves for the mistakes that we've made in the past. So this is kind of how it goes. We try something new. We don't get it right because it's new. Duh. We're disappointed that we don't get it right. Maybe there are some negative consequences from us not getting it right. Maybe there are some external consequences. Maybe there are some internal consequences, like feeling like a failure, feeling a whole lot of shame, whatever it is. Now, the feelings that come from that failure really, really stick with us. And if we have a history of trauma, then those feelings can trigger some past traumatic memories, and it can go really deep for some of us. So now we have this painful experience from the last time that we tried something new. And it's not the first painful experience that we've had, of course, because we're human beings and we've been on this earth for however long. And so you have felt pain before. So now this is just another of those painful experiences. So you go about your life, and in hindsight, in reflection, you see the missteps that you made. You see how you made that mistake. And we are committed to never making a mistake like that again. I am never going to make that mistake again. Not only that, but we are really harsh on ourselves for making the mistake in the first time. Why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I see that coming? Like, duh, I shouldn't have done XYZ, or of course I shouldn't have called them back, or whatever it is. Because hindsight's 2020. It's really easy to look back because now we know the outcome. So it's really easy to say that I shouldn't have done whatever it was to get to this particular outcome. The crazy thing is that we blame the version of ourselves that made that decision. We blame the version of ourselves who did not know what the outcome was going to be, the version who was not able to predict the outcome, because we're not mind readers, we're not fortune tellers. So we blame that version of ourselves that did not know any better. And then we punish that version of ourselves moving forward by not trusting ourselves to make good decisions again. So because we have these examples of decisions that maybe didn't go the way that we wanted them to, or decisions that led to painful outcomes, we lose all faith in ourselves to make good decisions in the future. So now you have another opportunity to try something new, or a new opportunity, but you don't trust yourself because the last time you tried something new, it didn't go well, or it was hurtful, or you felt embarrassed, or you felt like a failure, or you didn't get it right the first time, or you weren't perfect. So you don't trust yourself to make good decisions moving forward. So you don't give yourself permission to try anything new, or you stop yourself from actually working towards these goals that we think we care so much about because we doubt our abilities to get there. We don't trust our abilities to get there because we have not forgiven ourselves for the missteps that we have made before. In other words, we doubt our own ability to grow, all the while saying that we want to grow and working towards growth. But internally, subconsciously, we are doubting our own ability to grow, which is keeping us stagnant. So we're doubting ourselves, we're not trusting ourselves. But before you can trust yourself, you have to forgive yourself, just like with other people. If you hurt me in the past, then I'm not going to be able to trust you again, especially if I haven't forgiven you. If I have forgiven you and I decide to interact with you in a similar way again, I'm going into it knowing full well that I could get hurt again. But if I say that I've forgiven you, then I'm not automatically assuming and believing that you are going to hurt me again. If I really believe that, then why would I even interact with you at all? If I truly believe that you're going to hurt me the same way that you hurt me before, then why would I even be open to this? You know? So same thing goes with ourselves. Because we believe that we're just going to hurt ourselves again like we did in the past. Like we don't even interact with ourselves in the context of trying something new or working towards a goal anymore. Okay, let me give you some examples of how this has shown up in my life. Because, listen, I be sabotaging myself. No, I used to. See, I'm coming through that as well, and I'm not claiming that anymore. So I am or have been a habitual procrastinator. Me and procrastination, unfortunately, we go together real bad. Okay. It's getting better. I'm starting to detach from it a bit, but it is still there. Oh my goodness. And I've struggled for the longest time with structure and routines, like creating structure and routines for myself and staying consistent and disciplined enough with those routines. Now, as I'm getting older and learning some different things about myself, there might be some other stuff contributing to that. But either way, it's always been a struggle for me. It's always been a challenge. I have tried the planners. I have tried the bullet journal. I have tried the accountability partners. I've tried a lot of things. Um, but I'm like constantly trying to establish consistent routine. It's so funny. So I do a lot of like verbal processing just with myself. So I'll either record a voice note or I'll do like a little video diary, whatever, just like talking through whatever it is that I'm going through at the moment. I was watching an old video that I recorded like almost 2 years ago now, year and a half, 2 years ago now. And it's wild because at that time I was talking about needing structure and needing routine, and I was talking about the new techniques that I was trying at that moment, and I was like, this is the time that I'm going to overcome this, and I am finally going to get it, like it's finally going to stick. And I was watching it present day in 2024, and I was like, ooh girl. We're still working on it. We are still working on it. But that is a cycle that I have just found myself in for as long as I can remember, my entire adult life, truly. And so one day I was really trying to get to the root of my procrastination, really just trying to understand where it comes from. Because while I know it's present, like I don't like it. And there's this inner turmoil that I have with this procrastination. And it's like I can feel myself not working towards my goals. I can feel myself not doing the things that I want to do. But yet and still, I continue to find reasons to push it off until tomorrow. I continue to find reasons to just abort the whole mission. Like it's been crazy. And so I was like, you know what? We're gonna figure this out. Like, what is it for me? What's at the root of it for me? And a part of what I realized is that I was afraid to start something new because of all the times that I didn't finish in the past. I've talked about this before, but even getting this podcast up and going on a regular basis is something that had really been on my heart and on my mind for a long time, for years. And I've kind of started and stopped a couple times. And so when I was wanting to kind of get started again, I kept pushing it off in my mind, and I kept thinking back to all the different times that I had started and all the different ways that I tried to approach it, and it just didn't work. Like that's all that kept coming up in my mind, was all the times that I never finished or didn't follow through in the past. And this is not the only thing that I hadn't followed through on. And that feeling of not following through, like I don't know. It's been with me for a long time, but I think I've always kind of been ashamed of it. Yeah. And so I was like, we're just not going to start. If we can't follow through, then we're just not going to start. And I realized that I had not forgiven myself for all of the times that I never finished in the past. So then I started thinking about, okay, well, girl, why haven't you finished in the past? Like it wasn't just that you lost interest. That wasn't it. So what was going on that made you not follow through in the past? Those are the things that I need to be able to forgive myself for and really work through. And so for me, it's whenever I would get overwhelmed with something or when I would get frustrated with trying to learn a new skill. That was what I needed to forgive myself for. I needed to forgive myself for getting overwhelmed and frustrated enough to walk away from whatever it is that I was doing. It wasn't that I didn't care about the thing anymore. It was maybe that I didn't know how to deal with that overwhelming feeling, or I didn't know how to process what it was that I was going through, or I didn't have enough support around me to kind of help me to feel confident enough to keep moving forward, or I would let my insecurities get the best of me, or whatever it was. it was never frivolous. It was never, I don't care about that thing anymore. It was always something that I felt on like a deep level that made it challenging for me to continue moving forward in whatever it was that I was doing. And as I thought about that, I found some compassion for myself, for the past versions of myself that did feel overwhelmed and frustrated and insecure enough to just not keep going. And I think that there were a few different fears maybe underneath all of that. I think I don't know, I go back and forth between whether or not I have a fear of success or a fear of failure. And they might kind of be, I don't know, they're like two sides of the same coin, I think. Part of it is like, okay, well, what if I start this thing and it goes well and the people love it, but then I can't keep it up? Like, what if life gets to be too much and I get too overwhelmed and I don't keep going, right? Like, what if the same thing happens again? Essentially, what if I change my mind and don't want to do this thing anymore? Am I allowed to change my mind? Or if I do change my mind, is that just an excuse for me to not do something? So I'm like questioning myself in that way. And what if it's actually too hard? And if I don't have what it takes to be successful at this thing or in this way, like all of that, all of that was included in my procrastination. So when I'm thinking about it in those terms, I'm able to have a lot more empathy and compassion for myself because, like, girl, that is a lot to have on your mind. And that's a lot to have on your mind constantly. That's a lot to internalize and project onto yourself and to project onto everything that you're doing externally. That's a lot. And I could see how that might make it difficult to move forward. So thinking about my past version of myself as like a whole different person and trying to empathize with what it was that she was going through, that makes it easier for me to find some forgiveness in my heart because I didn't have the same tools that I have now to kind of work through some of those feelings. I wasn't as confident or secure in myself back then as I am now. I shifted some of my priorities and I'm not, comparing myself as much, or I've changed my definition of what it means to be successful. So some some things in me have shifted since then. So the next question becomes, can I trust the growth that I've experienced since then? Can I really trust the fact that my priorities have shifted and that my definition of success have changed and that I'm more confident and more secure in who I am now, right? But there's just this constant questioning of myself because of all the things from the past. And that was what I needed to stop. I was like, all of this, always constantly questioning myself and constantly doubting myself. Like I could not get rid of that. Like that was a part of the pattern for me, was the self-doubt, and it was exhausting. Very, very, very draining. In relationships, similar things happen. I I always say that I want close, intimate relationships, but at the same time, I am not the best always at opening up and being truly vulnerable with people. So then I don't have people who are close, partially because I'm not opening up and letting them get close to me. But then that develops into this belief that like no one cares or I'm just not good enough, when really it's like, a girl, if you would actually let people in, they probably would want to stay, but you don't even give them an opportunity to stay because you have convinced yourself already that they don't want to be here. So, like, what are we doing here? It just all becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, we could spend all day talking about the fears behind self-sabotage, but we've talked about fear a lot already. And I really want to focus on the unforgiveness of ourselves and the doubt that really leads into a lot of the self-sabotage. Because I'm learning that doubt and trust can't really coexist. And so if you are doubting yourself, then you're not going to be able to trust yourself. And if you're not able to trust yourself, then you're not going to feel confident enough to take that next step towards becoming that version of yourself that you really want to become. So, what are some signs that maybe you don't trust yourself? That maybe you're still punishing yourself for some things that have happened in the past? One of them is being very indecisive. I am the queen of indecision. I have been the queen of indecision. Y'all, I'm really trying not to identify with some of these things that I'm trying to grow from. I'm trying to, I'm consciously having to correct myself as I'm saying these things, right? Like, and I think that just goes to show the like narrative that I have created about who I am, or that I've bought into about who I am. It's like, instead of being maybe ashamed of these things that I want to change about myself, or instead, maybe shame isn't the right word, but um, instead of oh gosh, what is the word that I'm looking for? I don't know, but in this moment I'm realizing that I think I have really over identified with some of the things that I struggle with some of these patterns. And you know what? Because we are going to get into spiritual strongholds, but I think that's a part of it. I have really over identified with some of these things that I have actively been praying against for literal years. But even now, as I'm sitting here talking to y'all, I just said I'm the queen of indecision. Why would I say that? Why would I say that so proudly? Like, why would I want to claim that as a title? As a title, I'm getting ahead of myself, but like, Holy Spirit is doing something to me right now, and y'all just gonna have to go with me. Why would I proudly want to wear that as a title if it is something that I have actively been praying against, because I can tell and I can feel how it's slowing me down and how it is stopping me from moving into where God is trying to take me? Ooh, y'all, that just hit me like a ton of bricks. That was not where we were going next. But that is so real. Mm. We gonna have to come back to that. Let me make a note to come back to that, because I don't I think I have more to say about it, but we not at that part in the outline yet. Okay, so let me get back on track. Y'all don't understand. That was really a breakthrough moment for me. Like, I'm trying not to get emotional about it, but that was really big for me. Okay, so indecision. Signs you don't trust yourself. Indecision is one of them. In the past, I have been very indecisive about things. And not just like, where do we want to go eat? Because sometimes when there are too many options, I do get overwhelmed. But indecision about maybe the things that I want to do, or the things that I should be doing, not being sure if this is the right decision. Like, if you're somebody who constantly questions whether or not you're making the quote unquote right decision, that's a sign that you may not trust yourself, because you are believing that you're going to make the wrong decision because of all the times that you made wrong decisions in the past, which leads into our next sign of not trusting ourselves, which is being fixated on the past, being fixated on the past mistakes you've made, fixated on the times that maybe you let people take advantage of you, the ways that you represented yourself in the past, whatever it might be. But you're fixated on that. So then every time you come to a decision that maybe feels big and important, if you immediately start thinking about the past and how you've approached important decisions in the past, then that's a sign that maybe you have a hard time trusting yourself. Another, oh, and this is a big one, assuming the worst of yourself. Sometimes we have a tendency of assuming bad intentions of ourselves. I know I have struggled with that at times. Um, here's a good example. So I struggle with anxiety, and a part of that has been feeling like I always have to be productive, but then always having to be productive has led to burnout. So when I'm trying to introduce some balance and rest into my life, then I'm like, you know what? No, this project, I've worked on it enough today. The rest of it can wait until tomorrow. I'm just going to take some time to unwind. And then I'll immediately start questioning myself, like, you're just trying to get out of doing hard work. You're just making excuses again. Like, immediately questioning yourself and questioning your intentions, when it really is valid that I might need to rest because I have been working for on this one thing for, I don't know, 6 hours straight, and that's a lot, and I'm tired and I have a headache. I need to eat, like, and take care of my body. That's valid. But if I'm questioning my intentions all the time, it's probably because I don't trust myself, right? Or like, oh, I'm just being lazy. I just don't like hard work or whatever. But always doubting your intentions and assuming the worst of yourself. Okay, this one might feel like a bit of a reach, but go with me here. If you have a hard time accepting compliments, here's what I mean by that. Okay, hold on. Let me cook. Let me get there. If you have a hard time accepting compliments because you don't believe the compliments, then that's a sign that you may not trust yourself, or that you do not have a trusting relationship with yourself. You don't believe the compliments because maybe you're saying like, well, they don't know who I really am. If they knew who I really was, then they wouldn't say those things. So rejecting compliments because you have a hard time believing them. You have a hard time believing good things about yourself. And then the last one is villainizing yourself. So if in every situation you always find a way to make everything your fault, then you see yourself as the villain in every circumstance. You see yourself as the villain in your own story. Now, here's the thing. You are the main character in your life, whether you want to believe it or not, because you're the only one living your life. You are the main character in your life. Are you the antagonist or the protagonist? If you are the antagonist, if you are the villain, then you might have an issue with trusting yourself. Now, here's a kind of quick exercise. Ask yourself this question, or like take a second and think about this question. What's the story that you're telling about yourself or about who you are? When you talk about your life or when you talk about your experiences or your decisions, how do you center yourself in that? Do you kind of try to get ahead of it by doing a lot of like self-degradation? Do you project poor intentions on yourself? Do you call yourself dumb a whole lot? Do you see yourself as the ruiner? Do you think things about yourself like it's probably better if I'm not there, or if people get close to me, then I'm just going to end up hurting them. Like, do you see yourself as the villain? Like everything is your fault, and you somehow find a way to assume blame for every single thing. Like if I had just shown up on time, then I don't know, this thing would have happened or wouldn't have happened. If I had just, or if I just, had been able to keep my cool, then maybe we would still be friends, right? Do you believe that you are insignificant? Like, do you have a tendency of kind of minimizing your contributions to things? Like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. Anybody could have done that. It was a coincidence. Are you minimizing your contributions a lot? Maybe that says that you believe that you're insignificant or worthless or whatever it might be. But like, take a second and think about the way that you tell stories about your life. And how do you center yourself? Are you the antagonist or the protagonist? The antagonist is the villain, that's the bad guy. The protagonist is the good guy, the one that we all root for. Are you rooting for yourself? Or are you rooting against yourself? That's, you know what? Take that one. Go and get your journal out. Get your journal out for that one. Are you rooting for or against yourself? Because if you're rooting against yourself, if you're the antagonist in your own story, then babe, we've got some work to do. And that's okay. I'm glad you're here if that's the case. In the spiritual sense, what story does the enemy want you to believe about who you are? And how does that story line up with what God says about who you are? Okay, so let's go back to that breakthrough moment that I had a second before. The enemy has really convinced me of some things about myself. And this is where the whole concept of spiritual strongholds come into play. Um, when we are over identifying with things that we want to be released from, and then we can't figure out why we have not found deliverance from this thing, because we're still identifying with it, or we're still in agreement with it on some level subconsciously, right? Without realizing it. And it's the like without realizing it part, right? It's all happening in a realm that we cannot see. It's not happening in the physical, right? The Bible says that we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and rulers of the dark ages and all of that, because there's so much happening in the spiritual, and it's showing up in the way that we view ourselves, the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we talk about ourselves. And if we are over identifying with the things that we reject about ourselves, if we're over identifying with the things that we know we need deliverance from, then there is something keeping you tethered to that thought and to that idea. And it is not the Spirit of God, but it's something. And that tether, for me at least, at times, it has made me feel stuck. in my walk with God. Because again, I'm praying for deliverance from this thing. I am praying that God release me from the spirit of procrastination or of doubt or whatever it is. But then I'm going around calling myself the queen of indecision. I cannot believe that came out of my mouth so smooth. Wow. I'm having a moment, you guys. So in those times where I have felt kind of stuck in my walk with God, it showed up in my prayer life. And some of my prayers were feeling kind of shallow because I'm like, okay, God, I'm asking you to like release me from this thing, but it's still here. Like it's still on me. You haven't released me from it. So my prayers are more shallow because maybe I'm not as confident in them. I feel like I have no clarity or no direction, and I'm doubting whether or not I can even hear from God, right? Because maybe I'm looking for him to show up in a certain way, all while I'm the one who's still coming into agreement with these things, right? And so now that's turning into doubt in my relationship with God. And now I'm maybe disqualifying myself from feeling like I can be a voice for him. Because if I'm still struggling with these things, or if I feel like I don't have clarity or like I can't hear from God, then how can I lead anyone else to him? So it has showed up in so many different ways and really kept me stagnant. There have been a lot of distractions in those times where I'm feeling stuck in my walk with God. And it's like, no matter how good my attendance at church was or how like quote unquote holy I was being, because let's be clear, I am a church girl through and through. Okay. All I know about Sundays is church. Like not going to church on Sunday, just it wouldn't feel like Sunday to me. Even in college. And my college friends can attest to this, okay? We might have been out doing what we was doing on Saturday, but guess who was in church on Sunday? Like that's just a thing that I do. So that never stopped. Like the external acts of worship and the like spiritual acts, I guess, or religious activities, those never stopped. So no matter no matter how holy I was I was appearing to be on the outside, I didn't feel close to God. And another thing is that all these things I was doing externally were things that other people maybe weren't doing or were not doing as faithfully as I was. And so now I'm comparing myself to them. And so compared to other people, I feel pretty good about my church attendance. I feel pretty good about the fact that I pray before every meal. I don't know what y'all are doing, but like I don't know, that felt silly to say. But so I'm comparing myself to other people and feeling like, well, I'm still doing all the things. I'm still doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but internally, I didn't feel close to God. So I maybe felt successful in some areas of my life, but not spiritually. And there have been times where I know that I just was not moving forward spiritually, and there were some things that were keeping me stagnant. And the crazy thing is that I found a way to blame my spiritual stagnation on the lack of routine and structure in my life. And it was like, if I could just get the morning routine down, if I could just find the perfect time to do my Bible study, then it would be cool. If I could just have, some more prayer time, or if I could just do this, if I could just do that. But remember what I said earlier, I've struggled with routine and structure for a long time. So that was still going on. And I think it was maybe like a convenient excuse for not being more active and intentional in my pursuit of God. It was really easy to say, that I don't have enough structure in my day. And so like I haven't found a good time to consistently do Bible study or to read my Bible instead of just reading my Bible when I could. And so I would go like weeks maybe without reading my Bible in my personal time. So I'm blaming my spiritual stagnation on things that are happening in the physical. Those things those don't mesh. Those just do not mesh because my relationship with God is not physical. So why would it have so much to do with what's happening in my physical life? We are humans and we are physical beings. So we are spiritual beings as well. And our relationship with God exists in the spiritual. So my blaming the spiritual stagnation on what was happening in my physical environment was really, I think, another tool or another act of spiritual warfare. But the doubt that I felt in myself was then being projected onto God. So for me, I recognize that in my life, there has been a spiritual stronghold of doubt that has been on me, that has been internalized into what I believe about myself, that has been projected onto what I believe about God. Now, let's talk about the definition of a spiritual stronghold, and I think that that will help you identify some of the ones that might be showing up for you and that you might be struggling with. So, a spiritual stronghold is a habitual pattern of thought, behavior, or belief that is in direct conflict or contradiction with the word of God. So, let's go back to this doubt that I had, right? The word of God tells us to approach the throne of grace with confidence and boldly. It tells us to be anxious for nothing. It tells us to believe and not doubt. So God's word is saying, do not doubt, and that in him we have full confidence, and that there is no doubt in him, and that we should be anxious for anything. And when we are in him, that we are not anxious for anything. But this doubt was keeping me stagnant, and it was causing me to believe things about myself that simply were not true. I was doubting my healing, doubting my growth, doubting my motives, doubting my abilities, doubting my worthiness, doubting my decision making. It just has been everywhere for me. It's crazy because, like, I sat down and really, thought through all of this and kind of planned out this episode. But talking about it now, it's just really hitting different. And I thank God for it, because I told you I was really struggling, kind of getting this outline together. But right now, as I'm speaking it, I feel like it is really contributing just to my deliverance. And so, I again, the doubt, right? When it comes to um, my doing this podcast, and I really feel like this is, like a part of like ministry for me, and on the mental health side and on the spiritual side, I just feel like it's very important. Um, but of course, because we exist in the world and this exists on the internet where there is so much comparison, and so like, yeah, some insecurities have come up and all of that, but I just keep coming back to, if this helps one person, it's been successful. And if that one person is me, then it's been successful. And this has helped me so much. Girl, you're not about to cry right now. Don't do it. It's okay to cry. But um, I have seen a lot of like breakthrough and growth in my own walk from doing this podcast. And um, that gives me so much encouragement. That gives me so much encouragement because the more I mature in my spiritual walk, the closer I want to be to God, right? And the more I want to grow in Him. And among many things, one of the things that I'm learning is that we never fully arrive in any particular thing. Like, we never fully arrive at patience or contentment or grace or forgiveness, right? We have to constantly keep fighting to stay in his presence and to dwell and abide in his spirit. We have to constantly fight to stay there. And that's something that I am learning in real time. And we have to be very intentional and action oriented to stay there. And so for me, I think doing this podcast is one of the things that helps me stay where I need to be spiritually. And if I'm honest, as I've been doing this podcast and when it released, I have really felt a lot of spiritual attacks. And the warfare is warfaring, okay? The warfare is warfaring, and that tells me that I am on the right path and that I am where God wants me to be, and I'm doing what He wants me to do. So that's a good segue into our scripture of the day. So our scripture of the day is 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. This is one of my new favorite passages, like just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week or so ago, but it has been so powerful for me. It says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. There is so much connection between what's happening in our minds mentally and what's happening in the spirit. There is such a connection between our mental health and our spiritual health, because the things that we think to ourselves and about ourselves become so true to us. They become so true to us, and we believe in them so much that it becomes difficult sometimes to believe the things that God says about us. If I believe that I am a failure and a villain and a ruiner, how can I also believe that I am a conqueror? Those two things do not mesh. They do not fit. So there's some choice that has to be made about what you are choosing to believe, what you are choosing to keep in your mind and to meditate on. So we have to be able to identify what is of God, what sounds like God, and what he says in his word versus what is coming against his word. This verse says that we take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, which means that if there's a thought that is in conflict with Christ, or if there's a thought that's in conflict with what the word says, that through him, we have the power of taking that thought captive, right? My favorite part of this verse, what really stuck with me was in verse 4 that says, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. That tells us that God has equipped us and is equipping us with weapons that are divinely powerful enough to be victorious in spiritual warfare. And I think that helps us to take a more active role in that spiritual warfare. We do not have to just be victims of it, but we have an active role in it. We have the full armor of God for a reason, because this warfare is always happening. So not only do we have to be alert and diligent enough, but we have to be fluent enough with these weapons to know how to use them when the time comes. If we're not familiar and fluent with these weapons, then we're on the front lines and we don't stand a chance. We do not stand a chance. So these spiritual disciplines are so important because it's like we're in boot camp all the time. We are always in basic training, always. But the weapons that we have disposable at our disposal are divinely powerful, because this warfare that's taking place is not happening in the physical, it is happening in the spiritual. And so that is where our preparation needs to take place as well. And I think that also releases us from these negative thought patterns that we have that kind of keep coming back up, these negative things that we identify so heavily with, right? We have the power to take those thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. We have the power to overcome those thoughts through these weapons of divine power. So we don't have to be a victim to these negative thought patterns, right? And I know that a lot of this is easier said than done. And sometimes we have these patterns that are so deeply rooted within us that we're not even able to recognize them. And maybe we need some help recognizing them, right? Here's our therapy plug for today. Maybe we need some help recognizing them. I know earlier I said, what's the story that you're telling about yourself? And that can be like a kind of a difficult thing to like grasp, or to be able to say. Like, that's not something that most of us are going to be able to say off the dome, off the top of our head, right? And so talking things through with someone and going over your story with someone can really help to pull out some of these narratives that you believe to be so true about yourself and about who you are. So talking with a professional can help increase your awareness about these negative thought patterns that you have. And then we take these negative thought patterns and we take them to God. We take these negative thought patterns and we hold them captive to the obedience of Christ. So that's how those two things can work together. They can work together so that we can be successful and so that we can feel prepared enough to continue fighting in this spiritual warfare, because it's not going anywhere anytime soon. That's the thing. That is the thing. We say like you might have won the battle, but you haven't won the war. Like the war is ongoing. It is ongoing. So there really is no rest from it. So we have to stay very, very diligent in making sure that we're familiar with all the weapons that are available to us at all times. Okay, that's actually a good segue into our listener question for today. So, our question is, and by the way, just a quick reminder, if you have a question to submit to the show, send us an email at therapyandprayer@gmail.com, or you can also DM me wherever. Okay, so our question today is, how do I grow in spiritual maturity? There are a lot of different things that we can do. And I think it's actually really, I think that this relates to what it is that we've just been talking about, because a part of growing in spiritual maturity is increasing our fluency in some of these weapons that are available to us. These weapons that are divinely powerful. That is a part of it. So strengthening our prayer life, strengthening your knowledge of the word, making sure that you are developing a relationship with the Holy Spirit, having relationships with like-minded people, like spiritual people around you. So these are some of the like action items that we can take to grow spiritually. Now, I think, everybody has a different relationship with God. And I think what that means is that God speaks differently to different people. And you have to figure out how God speaks to you. Like, when do you feel his presence the most? When do you feel his direction the most clearly, right? Is it when you're in nature? Is it when you are in prayer and you're in silence in prayer? Is it in your dreams? Like, how does God speak to you? How do you feel? How can you tell that he's ordering your steps? Like, what is that for you? Because I do believe it's different for a lot of different people. And what are the things that help you to stay in that presence? What are the things to help you stay close to him, right? If you are struggling or going through a hard time, how do you reconnect with him, right? For me, one of the spiritual disciplines that I use a lot is fasting. And so if I'm feeling really kind of overwhelmed and have like a lot of mental fog, and I'm like feeling like I'm struggling with a lot of things, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, then I'll fast for a couple of days and just really seek his voice. And that has been so helpful for me. Now, let me tell you something. I tried the intermittent fasting and some other kinds of fasting for like physical benefits. I've never been able to be successful at it. But when I fast in the spiritual, then I'm successful, because I'm also asking for God's strength and guidance through however many days I'm doing that. So that helps me a lot, because it helps me to focus and it gives me some like mental clarity. But I think something that's really important in developing your spiritual maturity is leaning into the fact that everything has a spiritual implication. I think it is a tool of the enemy to try to make us believe that there are things happening around us or in the world around us that have nothing to do with the spiritual realm, or that have nothing to do with God. God is everywhere and he is in everything. And if you can get into the habit of looking for God in places that you typically would not look for him, I bet you'll find him there. And when we acknowledge that, then I think it makes it easier to walk with him all the time, regardless of what you're doing, not only in your prayer closet, or not only in your Bible study, or not only on Sundays. Like, those are not the only times that you encounter him. When we lean into the fact that there is spiritual implication in everything that we do, and we start to look for God in everything that we do, then we will start to find him in everything that we do. And we acknowledge that he's always with us and we're always with him. So that's going to help your prayer life. That's going to cause you to speak to him more. You're thinking about him more. He's on your mind more. I think keeping God on your mind more is a big tool in maturing spiritually. I think also don't be afraid to ask questions because we have to learn. And it says to study to show thyself approved. So when you really kind of take ownership over that relationship with God, instead of just letting it exist in the context of the things that you heard from the pulpit, that's going to really take you very, very far. And lastly, I think ask God to help you grow in wisdom. Ask Him to help you grow spiritually. Ask Him to help you mature. It's not all on you. It's not all on you. God is in it with you, and He wants you to mature. Um, I'm thinking of another verse in Jeremiah 17, 7 and 8. Um, Basically, it's saying, I think it says, this is one of my new memory verses. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose hope is in the Lord. He shall be like a tree planted by water or rooted by the water and whose roots spread. I'm losing it. All right, I had the beginning. Whose roots spread along the river. What that means is if you trust in God and if you allow God to be the source of your hope, then He's going to keep you nourished. He is going to keep you nourished and fed. That verse goes on to say that that tree that is planted by the water uh, doesn't worry when the scorching heat comes, and that its leaves stay green, and that it doesn't worry when there's drought because it's still being nourished, which goes to say that if we just stay connected to God, then when things happen around us, because things will continue to happen around us, right? There's always going to be that scorching heat and there will be times of drought. Things are still going to happen, but we will not be affected as much if we stay connected to Him. So how do you grow in spiritual maturity? Stay connected to God always. Always and in everything. Find Him in everything. Stay connected to Him in everything, and He will sustain you and He will help you to grow. Whew. All right, y'all. I did not know where that episode was going to take us today, but I am so, so grateful. I feel so much lighter after it. Let me tell you, me and God gonna have some good quality time tonight, okay? I didn't want to cry while I was talking to y'all, but we're gonna have a good cry later on today. We are going to have a good little cry. I hope that this episode was as good to you as it was to me. If it was good to you, I would love to hear about that. So you can follow the show on Instagram or on TikTok, on YouTube, whatever it is. I really love reading those comments and just knowing that we're all growing in this together. So thank you so much for being here. I hope that you will come back again. I love you so much and take care. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of Therapy and Prayer. Make sure you're subscribed and following wherever you listen to podcasts. And if the Spirit moves you, go ahead and leave us a review. If you want to submit a question to be answered on this show, send us an email at therapyandprayer@gmail.com. And make sure you're following us on TikTok at Therapy and Prayer. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you soon.